Chapter 1. Early Life and Family Background. Prophet Muhammad was born in 570 CE in the city of Mecca, which was an important center for trade and religious worship in Arabia. His birth year is often called the Year of the Elephant, named after a major event when an invading army led by Abraha, the ruler of Yemen, attempted to attack Mecca but was defeated. Muhammad was born into the Hashim clan, one of the most respected families of the Quraysh tribe. His father, Abdullah ibn Abdul Muttalib, died before he was born. His mother, Amina bint Wahb, raised him for the first few years of his life, but when he was only 6 years old, she also passed away. After losing both parents at such a young age, he was taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who was a noble leader in Mecca. At the age of 8, Muhammad's grandfather also passed away, and his uncle, Abu Talib, took responsibility for him. Abu Talib was not a rich man, but he was a respected leader and loved Muhammad deeply. Despite financial struggles, Abu Talib raised him with great care and treated him like his own son. As a young boy, Muhammad grew up in a society where tribal loyalty, trade, and religious traditions were very important. However, Mecca was also a place full of social inequality, where the rich exploited the poor, and idol worship was common at the Kaaba, a sacred sanctuary. From an early age, Muhammad was different from the people around him. He was known for his honesty, kindness, and wisdom even as a child. To support himself, he started working as a shepherd in his early years, taking care of sheep and goats. This job helped him develop patience and responsibility. Later, he accompanied his uncle Abu Talib on trade journeys to Syria, where he gained experience in business and learned about different cultures and religions, including Judaism and Christianity. People in Mecca noticed that Muhammad was very truthful and trustworthy. He never lied, cheated, or took advantage of others, which earned him the title Al-Amin, the trustworthy. This reputation would later play a crucial role in his life when he was chosen as a messenger of God. Chapter 2. Becoming a merchant and marriage to Khadijah. As Muhammad grew older, he became more involved in trade, which was a key part of life in Mecca. The city was an important trade hub where merchants from different regions came to exchange goods like spices, textiles, perfumes, and precious metals. Muhammad, known for his honesty and wisdom, quickly gained a reputation as a fair and trustworthy trader. His skills as a merchant led him to work for a wealthy and respected businesswoman named Khadijah bint Khuwaylid. Khadijah was a widow, but she was also one of the richest and most powerful women in Mecca. She hired Muhammad to manage her trade caravans, and he was sent on a business trip to Syria to handle her goods. During this journey, Muhammad impressed everyone with his honesty, intelligence, and fair dealings. Unlike many merchants who tried to make extra profit by deceiving others, Muhammad conducted business with full integrity. When he returned to Mecca, Khadijah's servant Maysara, who had accompanied him, told her about his remarkable character, how he was always truthful and fair, and how he had made excellent profits for her. Khadijah, who was 40 years old at the time, became deeply impressed by Muhammad, who was 25 years old. She admired his kindness, strong morals, and intelligence. Though many wealthy men had proposed to her, she saw something special in Muhammad and decided to propose marriage to him. To arrange the marriage, Khadijah sent a trusted friend, Nafisa, to speak with Muhammad. When Nafisa asked him if he would consider marrying Khadijah, he responded positively. He then spoke to his uncle, Abu Talib, who supported the marriage, and the proposal was officially accepted. Soon, a beautiful and respectful wedding took place. Despite their age difference, their marriage was filled with love, respect, and harmony. Khadijah was not only Muhammad's wife but also his biggest supporter and closest friend. She provided him with emotional comfort, financial stability, and unwavering belief in his abilities. They had several children together, but only 4 daughters, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, and Fatima, survived to adulthood. Their sons Qasim and Abdullah sadly passed away at a young age. For the next several years, Muhammad lived a peaceful and successful life as a merchant, husband, and father. However, despite his wealth and status, he often felt dissatisfied with the corruption, idol worship, and social injustice in Meccan society. He frequently took time to reflect and seek deeper spiritual meaning, a habit that would soon lead him to the most life-changing moment, his first revelation. Chapter 3. The First Revelation and the Beginning of Prophethood. As Muhammad reached the age of 40, he became increasingly troubled by the corruption, idol worship, and social injustices in Mecca. The city was dominated by tribal rivalries, and the powerful Quraysh leaders controlled wealth and trade, often exploiting the poor and weak. Muhammad, who was known for his wisdom and honesty, could not ignore the growing inequality and moral decline in society. Seeking peace and guidance, Muhammad developed a habit of retreating to a cave called Hira, located in the mountains outside Mecca. There, he spent days and nights in deep meditation and prayer, reflecting on the purpose of life and seeking answers to the problems of his people. One night, during the month of Ramadan, in the year 610 CE, something extraordinary happened. While Muhammad was meditating in the cave, he suddenly heard a powerful voice calling him. It was the voice of the angel Gabriel, who appeared before him and gave him a command. Iqra, read or recite. Muhammad, feeling overwhelmed and afraid, responded, I cannot read. The angel repeated the command 2 more times, and each time Muhammad replied that he could not read. Finally, Jibril recited the first verses of the Quran. Read. In the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Read. And your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. Surah Al-Alaq 96:1-5. Muhammad was deeply shaken by this experience. He felt a powerful energy filling his heart, yet he was afraid and unsure of what had just happened. He hurried down the mountain and rushed home to his wife, Khadija, trembling with fear. He told her, cover me, and she comforted him, wrapping him in a blanket until he calmed down. Khadija, seeing her husband's distress, reassured him. By Allah, he will never disgrace you. You uphold family ties, help the poor, support the weak, and always speak the truth. To understand what had happened, Khadija took Muhammad to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, a learned Christian scholar. After listening to Muhammad's story, Waraka immediately recognized the significance of the event. This is the same angel who came to Moses, Waraka told him. You have been chosen as a prophet of Allah. Your people will reject you, harm you, and force you to leave your home. But if I live to see that day, I will support you with all my strength. Muhammad was shocked. He had never thought of himself as a prophet. He did not seek power or leadership, yet he had been chosen by Allah, God, to deliver his message. Over the next few days, Muhammad continued to reflect on the experience. He longed for more guidance, but no new revelations came for some time. Then, one day, while walking in the desert, Muhammad again saw Angel Jibril filling the sky. The angel reassured him that he was indeed the messenger of Allah, chosen to guide humanity. Muhammad now fully accepted his mission and began spreading the message of Islam, the belief in one God, justice, and kindness towards all people. Thus, the prophethood of Muhammad had begun. His journey would be filled with both hardship and triumph, as he faced opposition from the powerful leaders of Mecca who saw his message as a threat to their rule. Yet, with the support of Khadija, his family, and a small group of followers, Muhammad would begin to change the world forever. Chapter 4. Persecution and the Struggles in Mecca. After receiving the first revelation, Prophet Muhammad started spreading the message of Islam. At first, he shared it privately with his family and close friends. His wife Khadija was the first to accept Islam, followed by his close friend Abu Bakr, his young cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, and his servant Zayd ibn Haritha. Slowly, more people accepted Islam, especially those who were poor or oppressed, as Islam taught equality, justice, and kindness. However, as the number of Muslims grew, the powerful leaders of Mecca began to oppose the new faith. The Quraysh, who controlled trade, religion, and politics, saw Muhammad's message as a threat to their power. Islam rejected idol worship, while Mecca's economy depended on the Kaaba, where idols of many gods were worshipped by different tribes. If people abandoned their gods, the Quraysh feared they would lose their status and wealth. At first, they tried to stop Muhammad through persuasion. They offered him wealth, power, and leadership if he would stop preaching. They even sent his uncle Abu Talib, a respected leader, to convince him. But Muhammad replied, Even if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I will never stop this message until Allah makes it victorious or I die. When persuasion failed, the Quraysh turned to persecution. They began torturing the early Muslims, especially the weak and poor. Bilal ibn Rabah, an Ethiopian slave, was dragged across the burning desert sand and beaten. Yet he continued to say, "Ahad, Ahad, Allah is one." His owner placed a heavy rock on his chest, trying to force him to renounce Islam, but he refused. Finally, Abu Bakr bought his freedom. Other Muslims suffered brutal punishments. Sumayya bint Kabat, the first female martyr in Islam, was tortured and killed for refusing to abandon her faith. Her husband Yasir was also killed, and their son Ammar was severely beaten. Many others, including Khabab ibn al-Arat, Suhaib al-Rumi, and Abdullah ibn Marzud, were tortured by the Quraysh. The Quraysh also boycotted the Muslims. They forced the Prophet's tribe, Banu Hashim, to live in a valley outside Mecca, cutting them off from food, water, and trade. For 3 years, Muslims suffered from hunger and hardship. Some even ate leaves to survive. But despite their suffering, they remained firm in their faith. During this difficult time, 2 great losses struck the Prophet. His beloved wife Khadijah, who had always supported him, passed away. Soon after, his uncle Abu Talib, his protector, also died. This year became known as the Year of Sorrow. With no protection left, Muhammad went to the city of Taif, hoping its people would accept Islam. Instead, they mocked him, sent their children to throw stones at him, and chased him out of the city. Bleeding and heartbroken, he prayed, "O Allah, if you are not displeased with me, then I do not care about what happens." Despite the struggles, Muhammad and his followers never gave up. Their faith in Allah remained strong, and their patience and perseverance prepared them for a new beginning. Chapter 5: Migration to Medina and establishing an Islamic state. As persecution in Mecca grew worse, Prophet Muhammad and his followers faced constant threats, torture, and boycotts. The Quraysh leaders feared that Islam was growing, and they plotted to kill the Prophet. But before they could act, a new opportunity arose. The city of Yathrib, later called Medina, was ready to welcome him. The migration to Medina, Hijra. The people of Yathrib, a city north of Mecca, were different from the Quraysh. They were made up of 2 large tribes, Aws and Khazraj, who had been in conflict for years. But after hearing about Muhammad's message of unity and peace, many of them accepted Islam. In 622 CE, a group of leaders from Yathrib secretly met the Prophet and invited him to become their leader and bring peace to their city. When the Quraysh learned that the Prophet was planning to leave, they became furious. They gathered in secret and made a plan. Each tribe would send a strong man to attack Muhammad together so that no single tribe could be blamed. That night, they surrounded his house. However, Allah's plan was greater. The Prophet instructed Ali ibn Abi Talib, his young cousin, to sleep in his bed while he secretly left the city with Abu Bakr. As they escaped, they took refuge in the cave of Thor, just outside Mecca. The Quraysh sent search parties to hunt them down. At one point, the enemies were just outside the cave, and Abu Bakr whispered, "O Messenger of Allah, if they look down, they will see us." The Prophet calmly replied, "Do not be afraid, Allah is with us." Miraculously, the Quraysh did not enter the cave. Some say a spider spun a web over the entrance, making it seem like no one had entered for a long time. After 3 days, they continued their journey north. A Quraysh warrior named Suraka ibn Malik tried to capture them, but every time he got close, his horse sank into the sand. Realizing he could not stop them, he finally asked for forgiveness, and the Prophet promised him a future reward if he accepted Islam one day. Finally, after a long and dangerous journey, Muhammad and Abu Bakr arrived in Yathrib, where they were warmly welcomed by the people. The city became known as Medina, Madinat an-Nabi, the city of the Prophet. This event, called the Hijra, migration, marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. Establishing an Islamic state. Now in Medina, the Prophet focused on building a strong and united society. He started by building the first mosque. The Prophet's mosque, Masjid an-Nabawi, became a center for prayer, education, and community gatherings. Creating brotherhood. the Prophet paired the Muhajirun, migrants from Mecca, with the Ansar, helpers from Medina, to support each other like brothers. Establishing laws and justice, he created the Constitution of Medina, which granted religious freedom to all people, including Muslims, Jews, and other tribes. Defending the Muslim community. The Quraysh were still preparing for war, so the Muslims had to be ready to defend themselves. The migration to Medina was a turning point. In Mecca, Muslims were a small, persecuted group, but in Medina, they became a strong and organized community. The Prophet was no longer just a messenger. He was now a leader, a judge, and a statesman. However, the Quraysh were not ready to accept this. Soon, they would prepare for war against the Muslims, leading to some of the most historic battles in Islam. Chapter 6. Battles and the Defense of Islam. After the migration to Medina, Prophet Muhammad and his followers finally had a safe place to practice Islam. However, the Quraysh in Mecca were not willing to accept this new Islamic community. They saw it as a threat to their power and trade, and they wanted to destroy it. Over the next several years, the Muslims had to defend themselves in several battles. The Battle of Badr, 624 CE. The first major battle between the Muslims and the Quraysh took place at Badr, about 80 miles 130 kilometers from Medina. The Quraysh had a large army of 1,000 soldiers, while the Muslims had only 313 fighters, many without proper weapons or armor. Before the battle, the Prophet prayed deeply, asking for Allah's help. Then, the battle began. Despite being outnumbered, the Muslims fought bravely. They believed that Allah's help was with them. The Quraysh army was shocked by the Muslim strength, and after hours of fighting, the Quraysh fled in defeat. This was a huge victory for the Muslims. It showed that they were not weak and that Allah was on their side. Many Quraysh leaders were killed, and others were captured. The captives were treated with kindness, and many later accepted Islam. The Battle of Uhud, 625 CE. After their defeat at Badr, the Quraysh wanted revenge. 1 year later, they gathered a large army of 3,000 soldiers and marched towards Medina. The Prophet and his companions prepared to defend the city. At first, the Muslims were winning the battle. However, a group of Muslim archers disobeyed the Prophet's orders and left their positions too soon, thinking the battle was over. This mistake allowed the Quraysh army to regroup and attack from behind. The Muslims suffered heavy losses, and the Prophet himself was injured. His uncle, Hamza, was also killed. Although the battle ended without a clear victory for either side, it was a difficult lesson for the Muslims. They learned the importance of discipline and obedience. The Battle of the Trench, 627 CE. 2 years later, the Quraysh and their allies gathered a massive army of 10,000 soldiers to destroy Medina. The Muslims, led by the Prophet, had only 3,000 defenders. Realizing they could not fight such a large army directly, the Prophet accepted an idea from a Persian companion, Salman al-Farsi, to dig a deep trench around the vulnerable parts of Medina. When the Quraysh arrived, they were shocked to see the trench. They had never faced this strategy before. Unable to cross, they laid siege to the city for several weeks. However, a powerful storm struck their camp, and they began to lose morale. Eventually, the Quraysh retreated in defeat. This battle was a turning point. The Quraysh realized they could no longer destroy Islam by force. Instead, the Prophet began negotiations to secure peace. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, 628 CE. In 628 CE, the Prophet and 1,400 Muslims set out for Mecca to perform Umrah, pilgrimage. However, the Quraysh blocked them from entering the city. Instead of fighting, the Prophet chose peaceful negotiation. A treaty was signed, called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Although the terms seemed unfair to the Muslims, the Prophet knew it was a strategic victory. The treaty allowed for 10 years of peace, during which Islam spread rapidly. Many people saw the wisdom and justice of Islam and converted. The conquest of Mecca, 630 CE. 2 years later, the Quraysh broke the treaty. The Prophet responded by leading 10,000 Muslim soldiers toward Mecca. Instead of fighting, the Quraysh surrendered peacefully. The Prophet forgave his former enemies and declared Mecca a holy city of Islam. He destroyed the idols inside the Kaaba and restored it to the worship of one God. The conquest of Mecca was the final victory. Islam was now firmly established, and many more tribes accepted Islam willingly. The battles and challenges faced by the Prophet were not about conquering lands but about defending the Muslim community and securing a place where Islam could flourish peacefully. The Prophet showed patience, wisdom, and mercy, even to those who had once tried to kill him. Chapter 7: The Conquest of Mecca and the Spread of Islam. After years of struggle, persecution, and battles, Islam was growing stronger. The Muslims had successfully defended themselves against attacks from the Quraysh and their allies. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, signed in 628 CE, had brought temporary peace, but in 630 CE, the Quraysh broke the treaty, giving Prophet Muhammad the opportunity to take action. The conquest of Mecca, 630 CE. When the Quraysh violated the peace treaty by attacking a tribe allied with the Muslims, Prophet Muhammad decided to march towards Mecca with an army of 10,000 men. The Muslim army was now powerful, but the Prophet wanted to avoid bloodshed. As the army approached Mecca, the Quraysh leaders panicked. They realized they could not win against the Muslims. Instead of resisting, many of them surrendered peacefully. The Prophet divided his army into different groups and ordered them to enter the city without harming anyone. Only a few minor skirmishes took place, and soon Mecca was under Muslim control. One of the most remarkable acts of the Prophet was his forgiveness of his enemies. Despite years of persecution and war, he did not seek revenge. Instead, he declared, "Today, there is no blame on you. You are all free." This act of mercy and forgiveness led many Meccans to accept Islam. They saw that Prophet Muhammad was not a ruler who sought power for himself but a true messenger of Allah, destroying idols and restoring the Kaaba. After entering Mecca, the Prophet went to the Kaaba, the most sacred site in Islam. For centuries, the Kaaba had been filled with idols that the Quraysh and other Arab tribes worshipped. The Prophet removed and destroyed all the idols, restoring the Kaaba as a place for the worship of one God, Allah. This was a powerful symbol that Islam was now the dominant faith in Arabia. The message of monotheism, Tawhid, was fully established in Mecca. The spread of Islam across Arabia. After the conquest of Mecca, Islam spread rapidly. Many Arab tribes saw that the Quraysh, the most powerful tribe in Arabia, had accepted Islam. As a result, they began sending delegations to Medina, declaring their acceptance of Islam. This period is known as the Year of Delegations because so many tribes joined Islam. The Prophet sent messengers to different parts of Arabia to teach Islam. He also sent letters to kings and emperors, including the Byzantine and Persian rulers, inviting them to accept Islam. While some rulers rejected the message, others responded positively. By 632 CE, most of the Arabian Peninsula was under Islamic rule, not because of force but because of the justice, wisdom, and peaceful message of Islam. The Prophet's farewell pilgrimage. In 632 CE, the Prophet performed his farewell pilgrimage, Hajj. This was his last pilgrimage, and during it, he delivered his famous farewell sermon to over 100,000 Muslims. In this sermon, he emphasized equality, justice, and the rights of all people. He reminded his followers that all humans are equal, regardless of their race or background, and that they should always follow the Quran and his teachings. This marked the completion of his mission. Islam had now spread throughout Arabia, and the Prophet had guided his people with mercy and wisdom. Chapter 8: Final Sermon and Passing Away. As Islam spread across Arabia, Prophet Muhammad knew that his mission was coming to an end. He had successfully delivered the message of monotheism, established a just and peaceful society, and united the Arab tribes under Islam. In the year 632 CE, he performed his farewell pilgrimage, Hajj, where he gave his final sermon, a message that would guide Muslims for generations to come. The final sermon. During the pilgrimage, the Prophet stood on Mount Arafat and addressed more than 100,000 Muslims. His sermon contained essential teachings of Islam, emphasizing the oneness of Allah, worship only one God and follow his guidance, equality of all humans, no Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and no non-Arab is superior to an Arab, except in piety. The rights of women, treat women with kindness and respect. The sanctity of life and property, do not harm others or take their rights unjustly. Following the Quran and Sunnah, He reminded his followers that they would never be lost if they held on to the Quran and his teachings. At the end of the sermon, he asked the people, "Have I delivered the message?" The people responded, "Yes." Then he said, "O Allah, be my witness." Shortly after, the following Quranic verse was revealed. "Today, I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your religion." Surah Al-Ma'idah 5:3. This showed that his mission was now complete. The Prophet's illness. Not long after returning to Medina, the Prophet became ill. His sickness lasted for several days, and he spent most of his time in the house of Aisha, his wife. Despite his weakness, he continued to lead prayers and give advice to his followers. One day, he stood before the people and said, "If I have wronged anyone, let him take his right from me now. I do not want to meet Allah with any injustice." Even in his final moments, he showed humility and justice. As his condition worsened, he could no longer lead the prayers. He instructed Abu Bakr, his closest companion, to lead in his place. This was a sign that Abu Bakr would be his successor. The passing of the Prophet. On June 8, 632 CE, 12th Rabi al-Awwal, Prophet Muhammad passed away at the age of 63. His last words were, "O Allah, with the highest companion, in paradise." His death shocked the Muslims. Some could not believe that their beloved leader was gone. Umar ibn al-Khattab even said, "The Prophet has not died." But Abu Bakr calmed the people and reminded them with these words, "Whoever worships Muhammad, let them know that Muhammad has died. But whoever worships Allah, let them know that Allah is ever living and never dies." This moment showed that Islam was not dependent on one person, it was a religion for all times. Burial and the future of Islam. The Prophet was buried in Aisha's house, where he had passed away. His grave remains inside the Prophet's mosque, Masjid al-Nabawi, in Medina, one of the holiest sites in Islam. Even after his death, his teachings and example continue to guide over 1.9 billion Muslims today. Chapter 9. The Legacy of Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad's impact on the world is immeasurable. More than 1,400 years after his passing, his teachings continue to influence the lives of 1.9 billion Muslims around the world. His legacy is not only religious but also social, political, and ethical, shaping civilizations, laws, and human rights. The spread of Islam. After the Prophet's passing, his followers, led by Abu Bakr, the first caliph, continued spreading Islam beyond Arabia. Within a century, Islam reached Africa, Persia, India, and parts of Europe. Despite facing resistance, the message of Islam attracted millions due to its simplicity, justice, and call to monotheism. The Prophet's teachings emphasized peace, tolerance, and coexistence. He formed treaties with Jews, Christians, and other groups, ensuring their rights and safety. This tradition continued with Muslim rulers who allowed diverse communities to practice their religions freely. The Quran and Sunnah as a guide for humanity. Prophet Muhammad left behind the Quran and Sunnah as the two primary sources of guidance. The Quran is considered the word of Allah, while the Sunnah, his actions and sayings, explains how to live according to Islamic principles. These teachings influence moral and ethical values, honesty, kindness, patience, and humility, laws and justice, rights of women, fair trade, and criminal justice, science and knowledge, encouragement to seek education and discoveries, charity and social welfare, helping the poor, orphans, and the needy, impact on human rights and social justice. Before Islam, Arabian society was deeply unjust, with tribal wars, oppression of women, and mistreatment of the poor. The Prophet fought against these injustices by introducing equality. No Arab is superior to a non-Arab, and no non-Arab is superior to an Arab except by righteousness. Women's rights. Islam gave women inheritance rights, education, and protection from abuse. Abolition of slavery. While slavery existed, the Prophet encouraged the freeing of slaves as a noble act. Fair treatment of minorities. He protected the rights of Jews, Christians, and other non-Muslims under Islamic rule. The Prophet as a role model. Prophet Muhammad is considered the best example for Muslims. His actions in family life, leadership, business, and worship serve as a model for all aspects of life. Even non-Muslim scholars recognize him as one of the greatest figures in history. As a leader, he was just and humble. As a husband and father, he was loving and supportive. As a businessman, he was honest and trustworthy. As a teacher, he was patient and kind. Recognition beyond the Muslim world. Many historians and scholars, including non-Muslims, acknowledge his greatness. Michael H. Hart ranked him number 1 in his book The 100, a ranking of the most influential persons in history. Mahatma Gandhi admired his compassion and leadership. George Bernard Shaw called him the savior of humanity. A lasting influence on the world. Prophet Muhammad's teachings laid the foundation for a civilization that influenced art, science, medicine, literature, and philosophy. His principles of justice, equality, and morality remain timeless and universal. Even today, his words and actions continue to inspire people to live with kindness, faith, and integrity. His final message to humanity was, "Convey from me, even if it is just one verse."